Michael Taylor was the kind of son every parent dreamed of, bright, kind, and full of promise, but the night he vanished without a trace, his family's world unraveled into a nightmare darker than anyone could have imagined. The Taylor family had always believed their town was the safest place to raise their only child, tucked away in the comfort of suburban streets. Surrounded by friendly neighbors and familiar routines, they felt secure. Their son, Michael, seemed to embody everything good about their lives. At 17, he was bright, ambitious, and responsible. Teachers spoke of his dedication in class, coaches admired his determination, and friends respected his easygoing nature. He wasn't the type of teenager who caused trouble or gave his parents sleepless nights. That was why the night he didn't return home felt so unexplainable, almost unreal, like a bad dream creeping into their perfect reality. It started innocently enough. Michael had attended a school event that evening, something his parents had encouraged. When he didn't show up at his usual time, they assumed he might have stayed back to chat with friends. Minutes passed, then hours, and unease began to replace their initial patience. His phone went unanswered, calls went straight to voicemail, and text messages were left unread. The Taylors tried to convince themselves that maybe he had lost track of time, but as midnight neared, their worry escalated. They drove through the town searching, retracing the routes he usually took. Streets that once felt familiar now carried an unsettling emptiness, as if the silence itself was hiding a secret. By the following morning, Michael's absence was impossible to explain away. His parents reported him missing, and police began piecing together the last hours of his known whereabouts. At first, the community rallied with optimism. Friends believed he had just wandered off and would return. But as each hour slipped by, hope grew thinner. Flyers with Michael's smiling face appeared on lampposts, shop windows, and bulletin boards. His image, once a source of pride for his family, now became a haunting reminder that something had gone terribly wrong. The unease spread quickly. This wasn't the kind of place where teenagers vanished. Families locked their doors earlier than usual, neighbors whispered theories, and the school where Michael had last been seen became a focal point of fear. Detectives reassured the Taylors that everything possible was being done, yet even they struggled to find answers. There was no sign of a struggle, no clear path to follow, and no explanation for why a responsible young man would simply disappear. The normal life the Taylors once knew had ended that night. What had started as just another school event had turned into the first chapter of a nightmare that would consume their lives. Detectives wasted no time retracing Michael's last known steps, hoping to uncover even the smallest detail that could explain his disappearance. Security footage from the school provided their first concrete lead. It showed Michael walking out of the gymnasium doors shortly after the event ended, his backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder. He wasn't with friends, nor was there any indication of distress. The video captured him heading down the sidewalk and then disappearing into the night. What unsettled investigators most was that no one saw him after that moment. It was as though he had stepped off the familiar streets and vanished into thin air. The search expanded quickly. Officers combed the surrounding neighborhoods, checked bus stops, and reviewed camera feeds from nearby businesses. Finally, a witness came forward with an unusual sighting. An older man claimed he saw a teenager matching Michael's description near the abandoned railroad tracks on the edge of town. The area had long been a place locals avoided. Overgrown weeds, rusting metal, and decaying structures gave it an unsettling atmosphere, the kind of place parents warned their children not to wander near. Investigators followed up, hoping it would lead them closer to answers. When officers searched the railroad tracks, the discovery they made was chilling. Lying in the dirt just off the path was Michael's backpack. The zipper had been torn, and its contents were scattered as if someone had gone through them in a hurry. His textbooks were dirt-stained, and his phone was inside but eerily clean. Every message, call log, and photo had been erased. To seasoned investigators, this was not the work of a teenager who had simply run away. Someone had deliberately tried to remove any trace of communication, someone determined to hide their involvement. The backpack turned the investigation from a missing person case into something far more disturbing. Detectives began asking whether Michael had been lured to the tracks or forced there against his will. The location offered seclusion, a perfect place for someone to corner him without being noticed. News of the discovery spread quickly through town, sending waves of fear through the community. Parents tightened their grip on their children, no longer trusting the streets they once thought safe. The Taylors clung desperately to hope, but deep inside, they could not shake the feeling that their son had crossed paths with someone who did not want him to be found. What once seemed like an accident was now beginning to look like the work of something far more sinister. As investigators pushed deeper into the mystery, disturbing details about Michael's private life began to emerge. On the surface, he had been the picture of responsibility, the kind of teenager every parent hoped for. But technology told a different story. Forensic experts managed to recover fragments of data from his erased phone, and what they uncovered pointed to a side of Michael no one knew existed. Over the past several months, he had been active in a secret online group, hidden under usernames that gave little away. At first glance, the conversations seemed harmless, but as detectives pieced the threads together, the darker undertones became undeniable. Among the usernames in those chats, one stood out, a figure who went by the name Raven. Unlike the casual banter from others, Raven's messages carried a strange weight, luring Michael into conversations that grew increasingly personal. Investigators noticed how carefully Raven had built trust, offering compliments, sharing fabricated stories, and eventually pushing Michael towards secrecy. It was this same user who had arranged a late-night meeting with Michael on the very evening he disappeared. Suddenly, what had appeared to be a random vanishing now took on the shape of deliberate manipulation. Detectives moved quickly to track the source of Raven's account, and their search led them to a man living 2 towns away. He was a reclusive individual, rarely seen by neighbors and known for his withdrawn lifestyle. Public records revealed a troubling past arrests tied to aggressive behavior and disturbing complaints that never resulted in convictions. When investigators arrived at his home, they found an unsettling collection of items. Hidden among stacks of discarded belongings were printed photographs of Michael taken weeks before his disappearance, some clearly snapped without his knowledge. It became obvious that Michael had been watched long before that night. The evidence didn't stop there. In dusty boxes scattered across the small, dimly lit house were personal items linked to other missing teenagers from nearby counties. The findings painted a picture far more sinister than anyone had imagined. Raven wasn't just a manipulator online. He was a predator who had carefully cultivated his targets. For the Taylors, this revelation shattered the hope that Michael's disappearance was just a misunderstanding. It was now clear their son had been drawn into something far darker, a trap designed by someone who thrived on control and fear. The investigation had crossed a threshold. This was no longer about finding a missing boy, but about exposing a monster hiding in plain sight. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators uncovered a hidden structure deep in the woods behind Raven's property. At first, officers thought it was nothing more than an abandoned storage shed, but a closer look revealed a concealed entrance leading underground. The narrow passage descended into darkness, and what lay inside left even the most seasoned detectives shaken. It was an elaborate bunker, built to hide what Raven never wanted the outside world to see. The walls were lined with shelves holding journals, photographs, and stolen belongings from several missing youths. The air was heavy with dampness and silence, broken only by the hum of old generators powering dim lights. This was not just a hiding place, it was a prison. At the far end of the bunker, officers found a locked steel door. Behind it was a small, windowless room that told the story of torment. A thin mattress was pushed against the wall, a single chair stood in the corner, and scattered across the floor were remnants of meals and scraps of torn paper. Most chilling of all was what sat quietly on that mattress. Michael, pale and trembling, stared back at the rescuers with eyes wide from fear. He was alive, but his weakened frame and hollow expression revealed the suffering he had endured. For more than a week, he had been held captive in isolation, deprived of freedom and left to the mercy of his abductors' twisted control. The moment of rescue was both miraculous and horrifying. Paramedics rushed to stabilize him, and detectives struggled to comprehend how close he had come to disappearing forever. The bunker revealed Raven's careful planning. He had kept meticulous notes on Michael's movements, tracking his routines long before the abduction. His journals described an obsession with collecting victims, each page filled with disturbing details of surveillance and preparation. Michael had been chosen deliberately, another name in a long line of intended targets. The arrest of Raven was swift, but the impact of the discovery rippled far beyond the Taylor family. News of the underground bunker spread rapidly, casting a dark shadow over the entire region. Parents realized how close their own children might have come to the same fate. For investigators, it was a rare victory to recover a victim alive, but it was also a grim reminder of how far someone's cruelty could reach. Michael had been saved, but the scars of what he endured would not vanish with his release. The unthinkable had been uncovered, and the world watching could not look away. The rescue of Michael Taylor was hailed as a miracle, but the aftermath revealed the true weight of what had been uncovered. For the first time in over a week, his parents were able to hold their son again, yet the reunion was far from the joyous moment they had once imagined. Michael's body was frail, his movements slow, and his silence heavy with memories he could not yet put into words. Though alive, he was changed in ways that could never be undone. The bunker had not only taken his freedom but also fractured his sense of safety. For the Taylors, the relief of finding him alive was forever tangled with the sorrow of knowing he had endured horrors they could barely imagine. Investigators continued to comb through Raven's bunker, cataloging each unsettling item. The journals were perhaps the most disturbing evidence. They were filled with chilling entries that described his thoughts in detail, plans for abductions, observations of children, and fantasies about control. Some entries mentioned names of individuals who had gone missing in nearby towns, suggesting Raven's crimes stretched much further than anyone had believed. The case, once focused on a single missing boy, had now opened the door to a much larger and darker mystery. Each object recovered added another piece to the puzzle of a predator who had hidden in plain sight for years. As news of the discovery spread nationwide, fear and outrage grew. Communities once considered safe were now forced to question how such evil could thrive unnoticed. Parents who had once allowed their children to roam freely now tightened their grip, warning them never to trust strangers online or off. The Taylor family's tragedy became a warning for others, a story repeated in classrooms, homes, and neighborhood meetings as an example of how quickly innocence could be stolen. For Michael, healing was a journey that stretched far beyond his physical recovery. Therapy and support became part of his daily life, and his parents struggled to balance encouragement with protection. The boy who once dreamed of college and adventures now faced the challenge of rebuilding himself piece by piece. Though alive, he was forever altered by what had been done to him. In the end, the story of Michael Taylor was not just about a kidnapping but about the unimaginable darkness that can exist where no one expects it. What happened to their son went far beyond a nightmare. It was proof that even in the safest of places, danger can lurk unseen, waiting for the moment to strike.